That Sunday, the rain fell as if the sky were trying to wash the whole world at once. And strangely, it felt like my chest carried the same weight as those clouds. I had just finished locking the side door of the church when I saw him, standing, under the awning, his shoulders soaked and his head slightly tilted, as if listening to a prayer no one else could hear. There was something unsettling about his presence. It wasn't just that he was out of place in this forgotten corner of the map. It was the way he didn't seem to be seeking shelter, but rather some kind of sign. For a moment I thought about just walking away. After all, what could a pastor's daughter have to offer a stranger adrift? But there was a kind of silence between us, one that didn't ask for permission. It just happened. And maybe that's why I said the words that, even now, I don't fully understand. Would you like to come in for a bit? He didn't smile, didn't thank me, just nodded and walked through the door as if that moment had been rehearsed, long ago in a script I'd never read. Inside the empty chapel, with the sound of the rain as the only hymn, he sat in the last pew and stayed there, still, silent, present. Something in me stirred an old restlessness, a feeling that my life, so carefully aligned with the tracks of faith and duty, had just veered slightly onto a new path. He didn't say his name. He didn't ask for mine. And yet, when he stood to leave, leaving behind a forgotten book on the wooden pew, I felt as if I'd lost something I didn't even know I'd found. I stood there, holding that damp book, with trembling hands while something inside me, maybe my heart, maybe my soul, whispered that the rain had brought more than just water to the earth. It had brought him, and maybe, just maybe, it had brought a version of myself I'd forgotten. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain still echoed within me, even after the sky had cleared. The book he'd left sat on my dresser, like an unanswered question, staring at me in silence. I touched its cover with my fingertips, hesitant, as if it was something too sacred to open, yet too forbidden to ignore. It was a simple copy, its cover worn, with notes in the margins, and passages underlined by a firm, restless hand. It wasn't a religious book, which was already a departure from my carefully spiritual routine. It was a story about shattered faith, rediscovered hope, and loves that survived the impossible. Each chapter seemed to pull something out of me, as if he'd left clues for me to understand him, to see beyond the unshaven beard and the wet clothes. And without knowing how or why, I found myself looking at the church door the next morning, like someone hoping a storm would return, just to feel their soul washed clean again. But he didn't come back. In the days that followed, everything seemed to go on as usual for everyone else. Wednesday services, visits to the elderly in the congregation, my father's sermons about patience, virtue, obedience. But I was no longer the same, and that scared me more than I wanted to admit. Each passage in the book made me see the world in a less rigid, less black and white way. I began to wonder if all my devotion came from love or from fear of disobedience. I was 28 years old, still living in the same house where I was born, with the same hairstyle, the same modest clothes, the same unshakable routine. And now, it took just a few underlined words from a nameless stranger to make everything feel too narrow. Then on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, I saw him again. He was at the town grocery store, holding a bag of apples and that same distant look, as if he carried a world of his own. Our eyes met, and my entire body stiffened, not from fear, but from something even more dangerous, curiosity. He smiled, this time, a brief, almost shy, but honest smile, and I couldn't smile back, because everything inside me was screaming and silent at the same time. I just looked away, paid for my groceries, and left with my heart racing, as if I'd just committed an irreversible sin. But that night, for the first time in years, My prayers didn't come ready-made. I didn't know what to ask for, or whom to ask. And the silence that once brought me comfort now only reminded me that something or someone was missing. The following Saturday, the sky was clear, but I woke up with a restlessness akin to stormy days. I tried to ignore it. I dove into the morning tasks, cleaned the church pews, organized the hymnals, prepared the altar for Sunday service. But even while washing the vases or folding the pulpit cloths, his image replayed in my mind like a refrain. The stranger in the rain, the forgotten book, the restrained smile at the grocery store. My father noticed my longer than usual silence and asked, with that gentle tone he used when he wanted me to speak without feeling pressured, "Everything all right, Mercy?" I nodded briefly, but inside, the restlessness only grew. It was as if my body was here in the sacred routine of our faith, but my spirit had begun to wander far away. For the first time, not out of rebellion, not out of weakness, but out of hunger. A hunger to feel something that was truly mine. That afternoon, I went to the town square, where I often sit quietly with a book or just watch the world go by. And there he was, sitting on a wooden bench, holding the same book, now back in his hands, as if he'd come to reclaim what he'd left behind, but in no hurry to do so. There was no audience, no apparent purpose, just him, the trees swaying in the breeze, and the distant sound of an old radio playing some forgotten song. For a moment I thought about leaving, but something in me pushed me forward, as if my steps had a will of their own. I approached cautiously, my heart in my throat. He looked at me as if he'd known I'd come, and calmly he said, "I thought I'd lost this book, but honestly, I think I left it." I sat beside him without saying a word. The sun filtered through the leaves above us, and I felt the light touch my face like an unexpected blessing. I read every word, I confessed. He smiled, deeper this time. "And did you understand any of it?" I hesitated. "I understood more about myself than about you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, a silence of those who don't need to explain themselves. And it was there, on that bench, without rain, without haste, without promises, that something began. I don't know what. I don't know how. But I knew, with the same certainty I have when I pray, that it wasn't the end of that encounter. It was just the beginning of something my heart was finally ready to live. At Sunday service, I sat beside my father in the front row as I always had, but nothing felt the same. His words from the pulpit, the hymns I'd known since childhood, the reverent murmurs of the congregation, everything seemed distant, as if I were watching my own life through fogged glass. He spoke about the value of faithfulness, constancy, and unconditional surrender to God's will, and for the first time, those words didn't find the same echo within me. Not because I no longer believed, but because I was beginning to see that faith could also be a living choice, not just repetition. While my father preached, my eyes drifted to the back of the church. And there he was, standing leaning against the wall, hat in hand, his gaze steady, unashamed. My heart raced, not from surprise, but from recognition. He hadn't come to confront, nor to cause a scene. He came because something brought him there. Maybe the same thing that now made me wonder if I truly knew what it meant to live. After the service, as always, I greeted the congregation, offered kind smiles, hugged the ladies who asked about my father, the altar flowers, the life they assumed was so peaceful and upright. But he didn't approach. He kept his distance, respectful, wise, like someone who understands the boundaries of sacred ground. It was only late in the afternoon, when I was alone cleaning the last candles after locking the church, that I heard his voice again. You looked beautiful singing." I turned, startled, as if caught in a thought. He stood at the door, holding a makeshift bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lavender, and some eucalyptus leaves. "I didn't come to shake you," he said, with that voice that blended calm and storm. "I just couldn't leave yet." I took the flowers, unsure whether to smile or cry. "And what's keeping you here?" He looked straight into my eyes and answered without hesitation. "The only thing that's made me want to stay in a long time. You." His words weren't sweet nor rehearsed. They were true. And that's why they unraveled me. I wasn't used to truths that placed me at the center. A pastor's daughter's life is one of caring for others, listening, serving, silence. But now here, standing before this man I barely knew, and yet felt I'd known since before the first rain, there was something new, someone who saw who I was inside. Not someone's daughter, not the church helper, not the proper girl from town. Just Mercy. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. That night, I placed the flowers in an old jar of my mother's, set it on the windowsill, and watched as the night breeze gently swayed their stems. His words echoed in me, like a silent hymn, the only thing that's made me want to stay in a long time, you. And I wondered what stay really meant. Stay in a small town where almost nothing changes. Stay in a life where every choice must pass through an invisible sieve of others' approval. Or was it to stay with someone who doesn't demand explanations, only presence? I slept little that night, but for the first time, it wasn't from anguish or doubt. It was a restless sleep, yes, but full of anticipation, as if something was preparing to bloom. Something in me that had perhaps always been there, waiting for the right moment to be seen, touched, lived. On Monday, my father called me for a talk. We sat on the porch, as we often did on spring afternoons. He didn't need many words to get to the point. He asked who the man was who kept lingering around the church, asked why he came so often, and then, with the calm of someone who's always been in control, he said, "You know, some people don't belong in our circle, Mercy." That hurt. Not because of the reprimand, but because of the fear I saw hidden in his eyes. My father wasn't speaking out of anger. He was speaking out of care, out of fear that I'd suffer, that I'd lose myself. "Does he have a past?" I asked. "He does," he replied. "But who doesn't?" That was the first time my father didn't have an immediate answer. We sat in silence. Only the sound of birds and the breeze through the trees filled the space between us. And in that pause, I knew. He wasn't forbidding me. He was preparing me to decide. Late that afternoon, I found the stranger, who was no longer so strange, sitting on the same bench in the square. I sat beside him without ceremony. We stayed there, looking at the horizon, in no rush. "Are you going to stay?" I asked, without meeting his eyes. "I don't know," he answered. "It depends." "On what?" He turned his face slowly and looked at me as if he'd been waiting for this moment since the day of the rain. "On you." And it was there, in that unannounced moment, without promises or certainties, that I understood. Staying or leaving wasn't about place. It was about courage. And for the first time, I had enough courage to live something that was mine, even if I didn't know where it would lead. Because some loves don't come with a map. They come with rain and faith and wildflowers. The days that followed were a blur of new sensations I didn't know how to name, but that filled me like unspoken prayers, only felt. I continued tending to the church, my father, the community's commitments, but something in me had shifted, as if the Mercy everyone knew had stepped aside, allowing a woman who finally dared to listen to herself to emerge. Our encounters, his and mine, began to happen more often, without planning, without promises, just the simple desire to share time. Sometimes we sat on the grass, and he told me stories of the world, places where faith was expressed in other ways, where people cried loudly, smiled without asking permission. Other times it was just silence, but never the silence of emptiness. It was the good silence of those who found shelter in each other. One afternoon, as we walked near the wooden bridge behind the old mill, he stopped suddenly. He picked up a pebble from the ground and twirled it between his fingers. "You know I used to be a pastor too, don't you?" he said, looking at the river. That hit me like a revelation. I had sensed it somehow, but hearing it, said so simply, moved me deeply. He told me he'd abandoned the ministry after losing someone he loved and blaming himself for not being able to save with prayers what life had decided to take. "My faith didn't die," he said. "It just changed shape. I learned that God speaks outside the altar too." I listened with an open heart. I didn't try to fix or judge. For the first time, I was just there, fully, and I realized that part of the strength of true love isn't in changing the other. It's in holding them where they are, even in silence. That night at home, I sat with my father again. This time he started the conversation. He came to me, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. My heart froze. He didn't say much, but he spoke honestly. Said he didn't come to steal anything, that he only wants to stay as long as he's welcome. My father sighed. "And you? What do you want?" The question hung in the air as if it had physical weight. I wanted to answer with something beautiful, something full of certainty, but the truth was simpler. "I want to try, Dad. For the first time in my life, I want to try something that didn't come ready-made. Something that doesn't have the right answers, but has truth." He nodded, with that look of someone who's seen too much of the world to stop a daughter from living what she needs to. "Then go, but go with a clean heart." I smiled. "Always." And in that moment I realized that love isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward, even with it pounding in your chest. Because the love that arrives with the rain, if it's true, also knows how to bloom in the sun. The following week, the rain returned. Not with the force of before, but with a melancholic persistence that seemed to match what I carried inside. The gray sky stretched over the town like a constant reminder of everything that was in suspense. I continued seeing him, the man who had entered my life like a silent thunderstorm, and now was part of my days with the naturalness of things we can't explain. But something had changed. Not between us exactly, but in me, as if now the love that was once just discovery and desire was turning into a responsibility, a choice. And every choice carries weight. That morning, I went to the town market to distract myself, but everything seemed to point me back to him. People whispered, some with curious glances, others with poorly disguised judgment. "The pastor's daughter walking around with that man who's not from here," they said under their breath, as if God couldn't hear whispers. I smiled kindly as I was taught, but inside, each phrase was like a small needle sewing an old doubt. Was I betraying everything that shaped me? Or was this the first time I was being true to myself? When I returned home, I found my father on the porch. He held the Bible as always, but this time he wasn't reading. He was just looking at the horizon. "Faith isn't meant to bind us, Mercy," he said without me asking anything. "It's meant to remind us who we are when no one else understands." My eyes filled with tears. Not because I doubted, but because I finally understood. It was time to choose, not between two paths, but between staying hidden or finally living. That night he came to me. He said he'd received a job offer in another state, a shelter that needed someone with his experience. "It's a calling," he said, "but I won't go if you ask me to stay." My heart tightened, not because he wanted to leave, but because he gave me power over something so precious. I took a deep breath. I didn't answer right away. I just hugged him tightly, like someone who doesn't yet know what to say, but knows the decision has already been born in their chest. He understood. He always does. And there, in silence, with the rain streaking down the windows, I began to understand that true love isn't the one that holds you back, but the one that chooses to stay, even when it could leave. That night, there were no promises. We didn't say forever, nor did we talk about marriage, children, or eternal plans. We just stayed there, hand in hand, while the sound of the light rain played on the roof like a subtle blessing. He told me about the shelter where he'd been invited to work, a simple place for men and women who, like him, had lost something and were seeking a fresh start. "I want to go," he said, "but I want to go with you, or at least know that I can come back and find you." For a moment, the old fear tried to impose itself within me. Fear of leaving the town, fear of disappointing my father, fear of what the church ladies, the congregation, the neighbors would say. But soon, I realized that those fears weren't signs I was wrong. They were marks that I was alive. And real life only begins when we stop living for others. I returned, home with a calm heart. My father was waiting for me in the kitchen as he did every night. He didn't say anything when he saw me come in. He just placed 2 cups of tea on the table. We sat in silence for long minutes. It was he who spoke first. "Are you going?" I nodded slowly. "I am. I don't know for how long. I don't know if forever, but I know I need to go." He looked at me with teary eyes, but not from sadness. "Then go with my blessing." I never imagined hearing those words, and suddenly everything felt light. The pastor's daughter, the one who grew up within walls of devotion, who learned to silence more than feel, who always believed love was something to be earned, not lived, now had permission to go out into the world with her heart leading the way. And deep down, I realized that permission didn't just come from my father. It came from me. The next day, the sun rose timidly through the still, damp clouds. He was waiting for me in front of the bus station, his suitcase by his side, and a restrained smile, as he always had when trying to seem calm. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. We didn't run to each other. There was no romantic movie scene. We just walked side by side, like 2 adults who know how much it costs to love truly. Before boarding, I looked at the town one last time. I saw the church steeple, the grocery store sign, the old bench in the square where it all began. And I felt gratitude for everything I'd lived, for everything I'd been, but mostly for having chosen to move forward. And then, amid the sound of the engine and the clearing sky, I let my heart say what my mouth couldn't translate. I was ready for the new, for the uncertain, for him, for me. Yes. Several months have passed since that day when I left my town for the first time without plans to return soon. The road was long and the world bigger than I'd imagined. But inside me, everything was surprisingly calm. I, who always feared the unknown, now woke up every day beside him. The man who came into my life like a silent lightning bolt in the middle of a storm, and who now was my home, even when the roof was different. The shelter where he worked became the place where I relearned to care for people, but in a different way. No longer with memorized verses, but with listening, patience, presence. The wounded who arrived there carried pains that never fit in the church pews. And among them I saw my own reflection. People trying to remember how it felt to live with a whole heart. My father wrote to me every week. His letters were simple, direct, but full of a tenderness he never knew how to show with. Spoken words. "We're doing all right here. Mrs. Beatrice wants to know if you'll be back for Christmas. Rose sent a jar of jam. The church is steady. but quiet without your voice in the hymns. And at the end of every letter, he always signed, "With love and pride, your father." I cried every time I read them, but I also smiled, because now I knew that his love no longer came with strings. It came with roots. And even from a distance, I never stopped being a daughter, nor he a father. As for us, our love followed its course like a river that learned to flow around the rocks. We had our differences, our silences, our tough days. But there was never again doubt about whether we were on the right side. He called me my faith with eyes, and I called him my shelter after the rain. We lived simply, without grand deeds, without headlines, but with intensity in every small gesture. The morning coffee, the notes left around the house, the way he always squeezed my hand before sleeping as if saying, "We're still here." Today, as I write these words, sitting on the porch of our new home, with the sun setting behind the hills and the sound of the wind playing with the leaves, I realize something I never thought I'd learn. Life doesn't need to be loud to be true, and love doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it arrives with slow steps, wet hands, and eyes that say more than any sermon. Sometimes love knocks on the door on a rainy day and changes everything, even what seemed unchangeable. And I, Mercy Caldwell, who was once just the pastor's daughter, am now also a woman of my own. I was found by the rain, and I chose to stay where my heart learned to bloom.